And then you can begin truly comparing apples to apples. And that's what I think it was so important why Craig said you've really got to concentrate on that. And so when we tried to make determinations of where could you really make savings, if we don't know what you expect, at what level, it's easy. We could say, you can save tons of money. But if you want that same service level, we may have guessed totally wrong. So it's really important to determine that kind of that benchmark, really.
Okay. Councilman McGinnis, you had a question or
Not
comment?
necessarily a question, but there were a couple of things that have come to mind while I was listening to people speak. And I think, first of all, was the comment that you made about you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I wanted to just kind of reflect back on our original discussions about option one. There were dollar amounts included, of course, because we had a task to balance the budget. But there was also a lot of strategizing and early discussions that we had about what it would take to fix our structural problem. And a lot of those included, and they were a lot of theory at the beginning of this course, but they included a lot of the things that you've given us in this report, consolidation and working with other agencies and changing the way that our organizational chart looks. Those are conversations that we've been having since we first talked about option one. So I can't speak for everyone at the table, but I think in terms of myself, this is what we were looking for. We were able to do what we could with the numbers so that we could provide that document that was going to get us going in the right direction. But I think that our ultimate goal was always to make those structural changes, and that was a big reason why we wanted a third party to come in, give us the objective opinions that you did, and I think that you and your team and our staff here at the city did a terrific job. But I think that this is a continuation of the process, so I'm hoping that we don't have, I'm hoping that we don't drop it. I mean, this is what I've always wanted, and I think that this is a great place for us to start seeing how we can make some of these changes. In terms of the dollar amounts and thinking that perhaps we were going to get some ideas of specific things that we can change and how much that will cost us, I think really what we're looking at is changing the way that we run here in the city. But I think that there are things in here that we can present in terms of trying to figure out what those service levels are. I mean, you've gone through with the help of the city staff and assigned every single function within every single department an approximate number of hours that it takes to complete these things and an annual cost. Right. So it's very easy now for us to present this information to the public, our citizens. I mean, I think we've been struggling here for a long time because I think what our service level was we wanted to have great services and we wanted them to be cost effective, and that's always what we've been striving for. And now that we're in this position, we know they're going to change, but we needed this information to be laid out in a way that we can say in our conversations with citizens and our conversations with the staff, this is exactly what we've been dealing with. What can we let go? What can we make our priority? So I think we are getting a lot of information that will help us ultimately make those decisions on where we can cut costs, where we can have our citizens say to us, we want this, we don't want that, and I think that you've done a really good job of outlining it. So I kind of looking at that in terms of getting you some of the numbers that we were hoping to get. I think it's there. Now we just have our work cut out for us in having those conversations about what we want to see and what we're going to be able to live without. Those are just my comments.
Is there a council member that hasn't asked a question yet or made a comment that wants to? Councilman Howard?
Sure. If we can look at your proposed structural chart for the city, under your department heads, you have obviously a number of different labels. My question for you is, that's our current one, but under the proposed one, the labels that you have, are those specific titles, or those more along the lines of functional areas?
They'd be functions.
Okay. Right. So it could be in a particular situation where one or more people handle 2 or 3 of those functions.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And for example, Councilman Howard, he's got park maintenance under Public Works, and he's got recreation under Economic and Community Development. And those both come under Parks and Recreation Director Carol Anderson now, but it's in 2 spots out there. Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
I very much appreciated Councilmember Beltramini opening up with the comment that this still is based on the full adoption of option 1 as written. And we do have that dilemma out there where, what if you could just find something here? I think it's interesting that you've used the term "you can bring a horse to water," because you've actually pointed a laser to our infrastructure when you talk about, that is the water clean and has it come through the sewers appropriately. So that's been something that's been a concern from the start. We have tried to take a big picture approach, and that's why we've talked about public safety, which would include the things you highlight here. It has been a concern, as we say, in the 3rd year, all of these things drop. It is gratifying to see it come into focus this way. You have in many ways talked about process, the improving of it from a big picture. I think that when the manager really said we could do this by ourselves, one department at a time, but we saw that the 3 years would be up and we would be no closer. So we appreciate finding out this information, a look at a reorg, council's role in determining some of the priorities, and certainly the revelatory nature of staff considering some things mandatory and core. That would be an interesting discussion to figure out. And that's the first time, I think, that we've seen it done from that perspective. I've never seen it from the eyes of these things must be done, or this is discretionary, and what the service. I think with the background from everyone in this room, there has been help, even though you kind of back away from it on service level, because you know what a quality service level looks like, particularly in terms of infrastructure. I would say even on our park maintenance, there was a way that we used to, in fact, employ our college kids in the summer to help with park maintenance. And when we were kind of hobnobbing, before we said option 1 is it, we were looking at, well, maybe we could revenue here, or we could cut a little bit here, and we were kind of doing the edges before it became apparent that we weren't alone in the economic seriousness of our region, state, and nation. So I guess that's a lot of conversation, but I think that you've really helped very much. This report helps to bring into focus something that's still been kind of spread out, and now we can see a direction, and I appreciate it.
Anyone else from council? I think Councilman Fleming, you were next, and then Councilman Slater.
Okay. Were you going to talk at all about the comparative benefits review? Was that?
I can do that, and I will.
If Mr. Slater's got something on
Yeah.
another.
That's the exact thing.
Sure.
I was going to ask if you were going to speak about the
Yep.
appendix.
And I need to ask a question. Does
The
council?
clock is broken.
Clock is broken, yes. Would council like to take a break and come back to that?
I think so.
All right, you
Okay.
want 5 or
It's now
10 minutes?
7:30.
All right,
7:30.
what? 5 minutes?
5
5 minutes? All right, we'll take a 5
Felt like my
minute break.
presentation was a lot longer than that.
I kept looking over there. That's not right.
Time stood still.
Okay, thank you. 5 minutes then.
I've never been able to make time stand still before.
Longest hour of my life.
staff, but it reduces for others, so she has to look at.
Okay, when we went to the break, we had just had the question about talking about the benefits and pension and post-retirement benefit review section in the agenda, which is 97, correct, Councilman Fleming?
Yes.
Asked about that?
Yes.
Yes, that was interesting section. Did you have did you want to talk about it?
Just wanted to talk about
Okay.
it.
All right.
We hadn't mentioned it at all, so just
Right.
talk about it in
Okay.
the question.
We depended in this particular section on our sister organization, as I mentioned, the Center for State and Local Government Excellence. This is an organization that's jointly funded by ICMA and the ICMA Retirement Corporation, and it also now does a variety of projects that are funded by foundations and others. But their sole mission is to look at health, pension, and post-retirement benefit plans and comment on that across the country and examine that for states and localities. And so we asked them to take a look at Troy and try to find out how you fit into the bigger scheme of things, and then just to give some general background on what's going on in public sector versus private sector compensation, so that you had a picture of that. And you know, this isn't going to be a long report. It's pretty crystal clear and succinct. You know, you've made the effort already to move people into defined contribution plans. You've done things with post-retirement health plans. Now, I will say that you can continue to decide what the right level, how far you want to push that. I mean, those are all policy decisions. What I would tell you in terms of what you've done already, it puts you amongst those who are on the far, on the more, what I would call the more leading edge. You're not at the pinnacle, but you're in the top half and in the top quarter in some cases, you know, particularly with the defined contribution stuff. That, I think, at the end of the day, positions you well to do two things. It positions you to manage your costs, which is the primary driver, and I guess the reason you've been doing this. But also, you kept things in place that still allows you to compete in the marketplace, because you still need to hire people. As long as you're going to have an ongoing concern, you need people. And if you get too far out of whatever the realm of competitiveness is for these kinds of benefits, you'll start to find out as you try to attract people. I think you're probably very competitive now, and you're doing the balancing act of containing costs, but remaining somewhat competitive or competitive in the marketplace. In terms of salaries, Troy, and I learned this from the interview process, Troy over the course of time has done a couple things. You have tried to attract top talent, and you've tried to pay at a slightly above competitive rate. Now, you would think that in looking at that overall, that would mean that you'd be paying higher than the average. Well, what we found when we looked at the available information from the Michigan Municipal League is that your midpoints of your ranges, you have wide ranges, your midpoints of your ranges are within 15% plus or minus for most of the job classifications we serve. A little above, but about that. I found out in digging a little farther into it, however, and when we looked at as much information as we could get on what people are actually paid, and this is a slippery slope, folks, let me tell you, because when you look at trying to compare one versus another, sometimes you have no idea whether that job is an exact match. You're just going on what you believe to be a pretty close approximation. Secondly, you just don't know the incumbent's time in a particular job, which might mean a higher end of the range. And you don't know the pay practices of the individual organization. That's important here in Troy because your pay practices are the midpoint tends to be the more upper end of the salary range. Now, you have a wide range and you have a midpoint, but people don't migrate very often in Troy to the top end of that range. They tend to, even if they're long-term incumbents, to be hovering right around that midpoint. In a lot of other places that you compare to, their midpoint might be a little lower, but they end up paying them all the way to the top of their range. So right there, you have to account for that. And when I was giving you that 15% plus or minus, I'm taking into account the fact that you have a different pay practice than a lot of places do, and I can't adjust for that with any absolute discrimination. So I have to give you a range there. In addition, in the last 2 years, you've had freezes on for pay and ranges, which has pulled you back. And the last year that I looked at data, and I have to look at last year's audited data, which is 2009, you're moving back towards the pack. So I feel very confident in saying that your salaries, while competitive, are clearly within competitive range. And your recent changes to hold salaries and ranges back have actually moved you back into a place. I can't tell you exactly what that might mean, but it certainly means that you're at a very competitive rate. You're not, a power of 10 beyond what other people are doing. You're at a very competitive rate. Now, in general, in terms of current benefits, and there's a table in there, and this was prepared by Peggy, so I only am providing it to you, but it basically shows you that the city of Troy has, I think, taken some pretty good steps to again, manage those health insurance costs. And the one thing that you've done, and you were an early advocate and adopter of this, is you eliminated the longevity pay, which really, again, puts you as one of the leaders there. That's happening, and I will tell you across the country that's been happening. Longevity, when I started in this business in the 70s, was everywhere, and it's not very common these days. But, I'm not making a judgment as to whether that's good or bad. I'm just telling you that it's an old practice, and it's not a current practice. And Troy was an early adopter of the change. With that, I will also go on to say that last piece on page 99 going into 100 was just there's a report that we gave you a link to. It's called Out of Balance. The Center for State and Local Government Excellence worked with another organization, the National Institute on Retirement Security, and they did a 25-year span review of public sector versus private sector salaries. There's a lot of folks, and there's a lot of interest these days on whether public and private sector salaries are comparable when you add together the benefits and some of the compensating balances for that. Some of the interesting findings were, and again, I don't know, I'm not making any judgment, it's just that jobs in the public sector typically require higher education level. Now, do they need to? I don't know, but they do. And thus, over that 25-year period, part of what happens is if you require a higher level of education, that tends to correlate with a higher starting salary or a higher salary overall. When you correlate the wages and salaries of state and local employees with those of private sector employees, over the past 15 years, that gap has grown. And so really, even in the state of Michigan, and Michigan was part of this, and I would commend you to looking at that report on the link that we gave you. We'll actually send you a hard copy of that as well. That apples to apples comparison is difficult, but what the report indicated is that even with benefits, government jobs, generally speaking, have paid less over that 25-year period. And so in the future, I think it's going to be interesting as we rebalance the economy. I think competition, I think rethinking of jobs in both the public sector and to a certain extent in how people compete in their small businesses and in business generally is going to change the dynamic in the marketplace. And I think you might see some differences there. I'm not an expert here, but we're already seeing non-traditional folks coming into the public sector. And when I mean non-traditional, I mean non-traditional skill sets. And that whole educational background thing is being reevaluated and being deployed differently. So I think over a 5 to 10 year period, you might see some different things. But in the rear view mirror for the 25-year period just passed, the public sector paid at, in general, all compensation being equal, less than the private sector.
Wait, Councilman Fleming?
Yes. Thank you for that. And I noted in your report on page 101 that the public versus private sector compensation, I'm sure that's for wages as well as benefits, it's 2008 data was the most recent data available. It's the past 25 years. There's a recent report by the Mackinac Center just looking at Michigan, and you may have seen articles in the paper on that as well, that in the past few years, past couple of years, due to the recession, that has actually changed in Michigan. And, you know, now the private sector is lagging behind in benefit. That may be a little bit unique just to Michigan, but we might need to take a look at some of that. And I know we're doing a lot of the right things already, but there's some new information from the Mackinac Center indicating that has changed in the last couple of years in Michigan, where that's actually.
And I do think, if I may, Mayor, in other parts of the country, we're working in Florida right now, where their economy is quite bad, and one of the things that has been recognized in terms of recruitment is that they're able to change their compensation practices because you know, the unemployment, I mean, it's a supply and demand issue here, and so bringing people in at a lower level has not been a problem. I mean, it's a competitive marketplace, and I think that's as much having to do with that. I do think the issue of skill sets and what organizations are doing and how they do their business is a lagging piece for government, but I do think you'll see some of that happening over the course of time.
Somebody else had a question before the break on an item. Councilman Slater?
I just had a similar question on the appendix, but once again, I really appreciate this. This has helped me a lot looking at it in its totality. But I know once we get the other report, that's going to have somewhat of a bearing on the summary, I would assume,
Sure.
of the entire report. But you know, one of the things that jumped out at me was that you didn't feel that we seek customer input. Is the best way to do that, in your opinion, through survey? I do think we need to do a better job of that, and I was just wondering if you could give me some input on that.
I think that getting customer input or understanding what I call it understanding customer requirements. I think that's up to a point unique in every organization, but there are certain practices common to many local governments. They would be surveys, in a general survey. There are point of sale or point of contact feedback mechanisms. There's lots of different ways of doing that. There are town hall or district hall or outreach or any number of, or manner of those kinds of mechanisms. There are some places that will do that in a structured way. There are some that will do it in an unstructured way. There are some that will do it on an ad hoc basis. They'll say anytime there is an issue with these kind of criteria or this dollar level or whatever, they kick into a public information and outreach mode. So I would tell you that in most of the best practice organizations, what they do is they feed in their citizen information into their process. And I wasn't going to do this, but I'll show you a graphic that just gives you that. This is from the only city in the United States that's won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. This is Coral Springs, Florida. I've done some work with them, and I know their situation pretty well. This is their business and strategic planning model, just in a graphic. And in your book, you have one called Pasco County,
Yep.
It's very similar to this. We worked with Pasco County and did that for them. But what it does this is just an ongoing thing. Now, you don't notice any times here. There are no dates, but it's a system. So you get to decide what the system timing means. They do regular collection of citizen input, but they also do regular collection of data. What does that mean? It means that they're constantly holding their department heads, their management staff, their employees responsible for reporting results. How'd we do? A, B, C, D. What was the criteria? How did we define that? What was the indicator? Feed that in, all right? If you have that kind of data, you're able to talk to your citizens. They get a regular citizen review. They do a survey every 2 years formally. They do one of the business community as well. But they also do other mechanisms. They do the point of contact kinds of things. The police have comment cards. It's done in a lot of places. They feed that whole system along with the other data into it, and that's what they use when they talk on a regular basis about their strategy. They'll say, okay, we created our strategy. What does the data on performance tell us? What does the data from our citizens tell us? Does that mean that we should change our strategy and refocus it a little bit? If it does, we'll do it. And then it just cascades down, and then it all starts all over again. When I was talking about a business cycle to you, that's the business cycle. It just happens on a regular basis. And I don't want to scare anybody here, and I'm not telling you that things have to change dramatically. This can be as simple as plugging into the goals and objectives and vision and mission and the stuff that you're already working on. But you asked the question about citizen. Citizen is a very important pillar of determining how you drive the bus.
We used to have a citizen survey card that went with a calendar when we sent out a calendar every year, and then as a cost-cutting measure, we cut out the calendar.
Yep.
So we didn't send out the survey
Yep.
to citizens, but because we were collecting data on a yearly basis previously. So thank you for mentioning that. Any others from the booklet that Council you want to ask about at this time? From Mr. Ratt? Okay, if there aren't any, we do have a public comment section, and because we don't have the Avis here, we ask people to fill out a card. Does somebody have card 2? And I need to have those to call on people. And the microphones here will pick you up. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, up there.
We
Okay.
can move that mic back.
No,
Okay.
it's fine.
Okay, they can go up there. Okay, all right. So I'll call on the people in the order that they have, and this is a chance for the public to make a comment on things. And so our first person is John Kerberry. Barry. And if you'll go up there, yes.
I'm going to make some innocuous comments tonight, but I just wanted to make a comment after hearing what this gentleman had to say tonight, because I've spent 42 years in the auto business, 22 of those with General Motors and 20 with an outside supplier. In the auto business, we have a lot of cyclic upturn, downturn. We've gone through what the city of Troy has gone through, only many more times, and to different levels of indentation into the company and to our staff. In the 80s, we started, as Mr. Rapp, is it? Indicated, in the 80s, we started doing customer surveys. We'd take a new model car, we'd take it out to a showroom at a dealership, we'd go to a mall where we'd see lots of people, and we'd get customer feedback, and we'd find out what the people liked about the new model introduction and what they didn't like, and then later in the phase of that vehicle, we'd come back and let them drive a runnable car, and get their comments. And we found that to be one of the tools that we really needed to be competitive with the Japanese, because the Japanese were kicking our tails all over the place in the mid to late 80s. And so that helped us close the gap quickly, because we found out what they were doing. In the 90s, we began a process, as Mr. Rapp indicated, that he's had experience with, of continuous improvement in our company. The continuous improvement was, you didn't have a target and shoot to that target. You had a moving target, and it was always getting tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher. And I can't emphasize enough how that helped us when we empowered the lowest level of employee to, the drain worker and the grass mowing person and the trimming guy and all those people. And you get them thinking in the city context of how they can improve their job, and set up a formal feedback to the city as to what could be done in their job and how they could become more effective. Because what you have to do is drive the level of the insecurity that we're all in as a city down to the lowest level, so everybody appreciated how tough the situation is, because it really is a bad situation. So if you can drive that to the lowest level and get all of the brains working in the entire city, thinking about becoming more efficient and doing a better job and helping save the city, pretty soon, I can tell you, by in the 90s we did the continuous improvement. By 2001, we had the most severe cutback we've had, and then in 2008, it just amplified it even further. We went from a staff of 228 people down to about 132 people, and we were still able to do the job. We were almost 50% staff reduction, and that's huge. And nobody ever thought we could do it, but we had to. And we did it, and the company was still functional. And this isn't General Motors. This is the aftermarket supplier that I ended up my career with. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of the customer feedback. That's the citizen to you folks and to the staff here as to what the people expect and what their priorities are for those expectations. Make them prioritize it, and then you just do the data and follow what the citizens say, because it's pretty straightforward. How you get from point A to point B, not easy, but it's straightforward of what you have to do, and it helps you define how you have to go about getting your job done. I would emphasize another thing Mr. Rapp said. I would emphasize training the continuous improvement process at the lowest level, and I do that as soon as you possibly can, because if you do that, I wouldn't do everybody all at one time. You can't afford to do that. But gradually start to do that, because if you do that early, you get the people involved in the fact that their job is important and relies on them being able to do a higher efficiency, execute a higher efficiently defined task now, because their jobs and everybody's job in the city is at risk. And then you start thinking in terms of, this is my job, this is my city, you don't think of it as just a go in and I got to do my paperwork today. You think about how important it is to the city and to you to have food for your family, to take your paycheck home and not have to be worrying about having a job. Because all the other cities around, I can't go and find a job someplace else because the other cities are in the same boat we are. And the other jobs are also very slim.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira.
Okay, I rambled on too long. Okay, I apologize, but
Thank you, that's
okay.
your 5 minutes, thank you.
Sorry.
The next
I didn't
person
know I had
is
5 minutes.
Linda Kaima.
Excuse me, sorry. Oh, is there? Okay. Sorry, I went off too long.
Okay. Linda Kaima?
Good evening. Most of you know me. I've been a resident for 36 years, and I just want to commend the city because this report makes it quite obvious that we're down to bare bones, to a point where we may not be able to be sustainable in some departments, and I'm glad for the report to show where we can make improvements and coordinate, and it will correct a headline in today's Free Press, which said that the report showed that Troy needs to shrink government to cut costs. Well, we've done the shrinking, and now we need to come together to see how we can help each other with those costs. But I think one thing that's important is we need to educate the citizens so that they know why we're doing surveys, because that's a cost to the city, why we're restructuring and reorganizing. There needs to be an explanation with all of those because there is a cost associated. So, thank you.
Thank you. Janice Daniels is next.
Yeah, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm making notes. I could just sit there and talk. I got lots of notes, but I'll come up here. As a citizen activist, I believe that our role is vigilant oversight over our city council, who's here to do an important job. And I have this feeling, with all due respect, that you are practiced in government speak. So it seems to me that you're coming from a position of, again, looking at our structure from the structure of other cities around the nation, when in fact that's not really the baseline that some of us people are looking for. We're looking for you to look at it from a constitutionally mandated level of limited government. We think that government is too big at all levels. And so I was hoping...
Remember you talked to the...
I apologize. I was talking to that gentleman. I apologize. But I was hoping to see some significant... I'm still talking to him. I am talking to him. I was hoping to see... I'll talk to you on February the 7th, but I was hoping to see some significant areas where you could say, we don't need to be doing this. We don't need you to be doing that. You're the government. You're not, you have some defined constitutional roles. That's one of my points. Another point is it appears as though there's evidence that there's $2.4 million above their projected budget for this year alone. So if that's the case, first of all, we'd like to use that $2.4 million to keep our library open for another year to give us an opportunity to look at other options. And if we can't budget for the year, how are we supposed to expect the budget for 3 years to be accurate and then make recommendations based upon an inaccurate budget? Third of all, you said that if you cut staff too much, they'll be suffering. Excuse me, there is suffering. There's plenty of educated, highly educated people that are not working in the private sector that would love to have a city job. We have $3.5 million that's being spent every year on the compensation packages of 20 employees of our government. I think that needed to be addressed as well. A year ago, we asked the council if we could put together a group of 5 citizens to come and help with the budget, to look at it from a different perspective. They ignored that. That seemed to be one of your recommendations. We also came to the council 6 months ago, and we said, we would like to have you go to your department heads with budget tasks. And that is not going there to say, hey, how you doing? Where can you cut? But going there and saying, you are going to cut $200,000 out of your budget, or you're going to cut $500,000 out of your budget. And I'm using just hypothetical numbers because I don't have access to all the data that they have. But if you can't do that, department head of mine, you can be replaced with somebody who can. So that's, in fact, something that I think you said as well, in a sense, with your task management. So I'm thinking that there's a lot of things that we as the people have already discussed. And your model there, it seems to me that there ought to be a little line going across data analysis to citizen input, because how is a citizen supposed to come up with the input if we don't have access to the data? And that's where the community involvement needs to be more clearly defined. We're here, we're ready, we're willing, and we're able to help. We have to be invited to help, and they haven't invited us. Why does the city go, and you find this to be typical, that a city goes to the jugular, they close down our library, or they don't remove the snow, rather than going into their departments and saying, let's cut here, let's cut there, let's cut this, let's cut that, and save the heart of the city, for God's sakes? We do want to maintain a decent city. We're not in an oasis. This budget problem is nationwide. It's not just Troy. We're not going to lose our status as a valuable and sought-after city because we're cutting when nobody else is cutting. Everybody's going to have to cut. So we have to look at it from that perspective as well. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Those were the three people that signed cards. Was there anybody else? Okay, thank you all for coming, and then we are in adjournment. Yes.